how would you suggest people like actually approach working with their deck? Like what are effective questions or intentions?
Yeah, that's one of my favorite questions because you're right. Like, and I've made the same mistakes. I still do sometimes. Being mindful of things. A yes or no answer, or yes or no question, is not what the tarot deck is here for. As well as the types of things that Christina just rattled off that we've all done. But I'd say, like, first off, one of my biggest suggestions is getting to know your deck. And this is going to sound really crazy, but like actually having conversation, asking the deck, what are you here to help me with? What are you, because if you're anything like me or Christina, you're probably going to start with one and then you're going to want like 10 more very quickly. You're going to dive into it. Ask your deck like what area of life they want to talk about, or the cards want to talk about, what personality they kind of have, if it's going to be lighter or more shadow, if it's going to be more humorous, and just kind of get a vibe of like how this tool is meant to be in partnership with you and your intuition. And it's going to feel silly. It's going to feel like you're talking to an object, because you are. But what you're actually doing is infusing trust and like a more conversational approach that's going to be a lot more authentic. It's going to feel less like it's like a daunting message and more like a collaboration between you and this object, because that's what it is. It's an extension of your energy and it's taking on your energy. So that's like my first thought. And then from there, building questions like, starting with what you can do in the short term. How can I support myself today? What small step can I take to ground myself today, this week, this month? If you want to work with timing, you could also ask simply, what am I meant to look at today? What theme am I meant to look at? Anything that really sets you up for like action and reflection and like the next step, because the bottom line is a card's going to present some kind of opportunity or message, but it is really about what you do with it. So anytime you ask like what's present right now, I encourage asking as well, what can I do about it? Should I just lean into it? Should I just enjoy it and savor it like the 3 of Cups? Or should I move past it? Should I set some boundary, have a conversation? Like what's next from this?
Yes, love that. That's super helpful because I mean, I do the same thing. I'm usually asking about like what's going on here
Yeah.
versus like what am I doing next? I usually do that more like just psychically, but I want to play more of that with my tarot cards. And yes, they all very much have very different personalities. So and for me, I feel like that wasn't actually totally apparent until I got more decks. And I was like, oh, this the vibe of this is so different than this one. Which is yeah, it's just it's a lot of fun. What I want to know is what do you feel like are the biggest mistakes people make?
Mm. Pulling too many cards too quickly, getting kind of like card happy,
Mm,
because that's a way of like deflecting and not staying present with the original message. Like we get card happy and shuffling happy because we're excited about the practice, but it is something that like taking your time, slowing down. You can't be There's 78 different lessons throughout the deck. You can't be living in all of them at the exact same time. So like really savoring, especially when you first start, like taking your time to enjoy and experience the energy fully so that you can actually remember it. That's where it goes from like flashcards to like experiencing and being able to speak from a more knowledgeable and like wise space. So yeah, I'd say like just slowing down is what I noticed, because, and it's always coming from a place of like an excited golden retriever, like I got my first deck, I want to be into this. But it's like really give it the time and the space to like simmer.
hmm I feel like that's connected to what we were talking about before because what I notice with people with their psychic gifts is there's this, it's unintentional, but there's a judgment of the message that comes through. Like it's not good enough. Like
Too
that's it.
simple.
Well, I need it. Yeah, it's too simple. Well, I need another one, right? It's like when your spirit guides are like telling you how much they love you and you're like, okay, great, but what's next? It's like you're not actually receiving the message. And I think that happens sometimes with like tarot as well or whatever cards. It's like somebody will pull and they're like, okay, but I already know that. So like I'm gonna keep pulling because I want something I don't know.
Well, and it speaks to the problem of like our souls and our energy were never meant to have this much stimulation, what
Yeah.
we're experiencing right now. Like it was never meant to be this complicated, in my
Yeah.
opinion.
Yeah.
But it's gotten wild. So yeah, we're used to the constant notifications and this and that. And you're coming back to something as simple as your spirit guide saying, I love you. That should be like more than enough. That should be the most like, so it's, yeah, just kind of like calling ourselves out. And I do it too. Like I start to ego channel on my own sometimes. And it's like, whoa, what am I trying to look for? Like, is it already there? I think another point that came to mind when you were sharing that was like, start to find the ways that a message feels authentic. Like notice, and it's not to say that the other like channeling or downloads, whatever word you want to use, wasn't truthful. It's just like for me, when I'm doing like personal like connection with my spirit guides, if I start to tear up, I know it's legit. I know like that's my body's way of reacting and saying like, this is it, Kate, you're on something. And it doesn't mean that the previous times I've connected with them or meditated weren't valid. It just gives me confirmation of like, you're really, really connecting right now. And to find so much peace and gratitude for that. And to be fair, if I did that every single time, it wouldn't have that like magic anymore. So it's it's important when we're like learning these tools to kind of find our different degrees of connection too, and appreciate when we're like fully there versus kind of, just quickly tapping in. Do you agree,
Mhm.
or does that make sense? What
Oh,
I'm
I
saying?
totally agree. And that's what I always tell people. Like, I think like clairsentience is the most underrated psychic gift. But I think it's the most reliable check. And so because I find that people sometimes with the clairaudience, with the clairvoyance, um, sometimes there's confusion, right? It's like that was channeled, that was your brain, like back and forth. And if you're ever unsure, like your body doesn't like you can't like you're not gonna like fake all these goosebumps in your body. You're not gonna fake that, right? Or the tears, right? That happens to me like too, where this just happened to me the other day, and I was just like bawling. My whole body was like, oh my God, like when it came through, and I'm like, oh wow, and I'm really glad you brought that up because I would say the same thing. Like if you're interacting with a deck or even a crystal, whatever it is, or you're channeling, like how is your body responding?
Mhm.
And I think that with cards, right, it can be easy to be like, oh, I'm going to pull some cards really quickly. And I'm still in my mind. I'm like still in my left brain and I'm like pulling the cards. It's a very different experience than me being in my like intuition and being in my feminine and flowing with it and like working with the deck from a more intuitive space. It's a completely different experience. And that's where it's like involving the body, right? And working with that clairsentience, to me, that would be like a completely different result.
Yeah, and honestly, this brings us to kind of this point too, and like a little nod to like our history with eating disorders and body stuff, because it's like that is such a surrender to give over, your body's reaction and to trust that your body's going to hold and contain whatever this experience is. So yeah, I fully agree. I think clairsentience is super underrated, and I like the way you said that, because we can't force it, but it's truly just like surrender, and that's
Yeah.
that's really powerful too.